Gentleman, David Denney is an attorney in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He represents numerous, primarily he's in the independent restaurant and food service operator space. He's, as you can see, he's 2019-2020 president of the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association, and he's currently a board member of the Texas Restaurant Association. He writes frequently. He speaks at almost all of our conferences, and we're always delighted to welcome him back, the bacon lover that he is. Today, he's going to talk to us about asking the magic 8-ball. You guys probably remember that if you were my age, hopefully not. But a glimpse into the post-COVID world for F&B operators. Take it away, David D.
Thanks so much, Stephen. I appreciate it. It's always fun to be able to address this group. I'm glad we have so many people on today. And so my thought process on this was, since nobody believes science anyway, we might as well just go with something that makes sense to people and ask the magic 8-ball. So I hear it's coming back kind of like Rubik's Cube. And so I have used it for sage advice and wisdom throughout the pandemic, and it has served me well. So I put a ton of data into this slide presentation. So I hope that later when it's made available that you guys will be able to peruse it. 33 slides for 10 minutes and a 20-minute Q&A is egregiously long, but I wanted to just hit some highlights of things that obviously where we have come from, and hopefully a little glimpse into where we are going. So as everybody here is probably acutely aware, the restaurant industry was decimated by the COVID pandemic. And again, I don't know how scientific some of these numbers are. They're basically done by usually National Restaurant Association surveys. But at one point at the height of the pandemic, including furloughs, the job losses were 8 million across all food service categories, from the second largest private employer in the country to one now that is suffering. And we've talked a little bit about labor throughout the day today, but we are in a nationwide labor drought. And it is, I don't know, I have in-group bias, but I feel like it's affecting F&B and hospitality disproportionately to other sectors. So it has and it will continue to be for some time a pretty drastic and dire circumstance. People would rather sit at home for extra money and play Xbox than go to work. And I don't really know that I can blame them. But we see some good promising numbers, right? From the height of the lockdown in March to May of 2020 to now, we see people that are going out to eat more. Those numbers are essentially doubling, which is what you would expect and hope for, but I think these numbers prove it out. It's a small sample, 1,000 people, but I think it's probably reflective of the general sense of people coming out of hiding, especially as things open up on the coasts. And we see that the people are trying to get back to normal and enjoy their day-to-day weekly restaurant regimen. So again, delivery and takeout during the lockdown was extremely high, and we're seeing numbers that are still very high in delivery and takeout. And I think we will continue to see that. As we look ahead toward trends, we're going to focus a lot on delivery and takeout and what it means, not only for sales and restaurant apparatus, but also for future real estate and that kind of thing. So will takeout and delivery continue to be important? You better believe it will be. All signs point to yes, it is. That's my favorite magic 8-ball answer. So third-party delivery. I've spoken on this to this conference before. I've spoken about it and written about it. And everybody essentially now knows the cost of third-party delivery, whether it's from a dollar standpoint or a marketing standpoint. We've talked about how it can affect your percentage rent calculation. One that I haven't added recently is I've talked about degradation of food quality, but the reason Ruben is making a delivery along the way is in red is because when I was making the slideshow, Ruben made a delivery along the way, and it kind of pissed me off because I had to wait for my food, and I was here late working on this, and Ruben made me mad. So you can't control whether an Uber Eats driver is going to pick up another Uber Eats delivery that may or may not be on the way. So anyway, pay attention to that. They now let you pay a little extra to get a direct drive. which is kind of chumpy, but it is what it is. So benefits, marketing, etc. Post-COVID, everyone who didn't use it before, essentially everyone, went into some sort of delivery and to-go mechanism. I mean, super high-end steakhouses were using third-party delivery to deliver porterhouses and mashed potatoes. It was crazy. And not everybody did, but a lot of them did. Some of them just focused on curbside. But we're going to continue to see that because people have now had 16 months of, or not quite 16 months, but 13 months of habit formed for takeout and delivery. And those are going to take a while to wane as people become more comfortable. So the question always remains, could you build your own delivery platform? I mean, really all you need to do is look at the insurance ramifications and figure out if you can build that into your model. It might affect your culture a little bit, but if you're a quick service or even a fast casual, you might be able to pull off. And we've actually in a conference in 2020 that Stephen hosted, we talked about building your own third-party delivery platform, and it is doable. So might want to consider that. Takeout should remain a preferred vehicle for a long time. And the challenge there is to allow the guest to become a participant in the restaurant experience from the parking lot or from the window. And there's not a slide for this, but and those of you who know me know I am no fan of chains, but on March 18th of 2020, Jack in the Box hit a stock price low of $16.81, and I just looked before I came on today, and it's $120 and change. So if you have a drive-through window and a good marketing campaign, theirs was hashtag stay in the box. See what they did there? They actually sold more premium items than ever before. And so a stock price increase from $16.81 to $120 is nothing to sneeze at. And many, many publicly traded restaurant companies had similar shaped graphs between March 16, March 23, and today. So they weathered that storm pretty well relative to their independent peers who were not so lucky. I see in the future fiercely negotiated to-go parking. It's going to become more of an asset. You may not be able to enforce towing out of those. Landlords really, really hate it when you start towing patrons out of their parking lots, but just being able to put up signage is better than nothing. And we have been told that Governor Abbott is signing the to-go booze legislation within 10 days of today, or maybe of yesterday. None of that takes effect September 1st nonsense for to-go booze. That's happening right now. So many states, and we're going to hear from Gray Robinson tomorrow about the shifting paradigm of to-go alcohol, delivery alcohol. So I'm going to leave that for another day, but it was a lifeline. And I think people are going to continue to enjoy it because it has, I mean, heck, I picked up a to-go margarita last week in a cup with a lid that had no straw hole. So that was sealed. In our last interaction with the prior group, talking about Canadian trademarks and ghost kitchens, we have definitely seen those ramp up in popularity as people created ghost kitchens or virtual kitchens or even sort of side hustles out of their own restaurant space. So the benefits of the ghost kitchens are you don't have any front of the house staff and you repurpose some people and you can run multiple concepts out of the same kitchen. Yeah, any questions about that, reach out to me because we're working on quite a few of those right now. It's going to happen when the delivery services themselves are constructing their own virtual kitchens and renting them out to restaurant brands. And then side hustles are when an existing restaurant puts a bunch of new concept ideas online, either as R&D or to utilize their delivery and purchasing assets to take advantage of slower day parts. And let's see, the next slide we're going to get to, this is what Ruben was really slow with, was my pizza from Thunderbird Pies. And so our client Zoli's created, Zoli's is a New York style pizza, and it created a Detroit style pizza that operated from 2 to 7 and had about 40 pizzas a day available, and created a sense of demand and limited quantity, and it was fantastically successful. Now they're building one near my house, which is amazing. So will our guests become more reasonable post-COVID? Well, they'll never be reasonable, but will we continue to find creative ways to engage them? Probably so. That's what F&B is all about. So guests expect employees to be masked. They expect the same level of service pre-pandemic that they have come to expect over their lifetime. And they will continue to expect that as we continue to transition. And they will continue to take their frustrations out on the staff. So pro-mask people are going to take their frustrations out on places that don't enforce it, and anti-maskers are going to take their frustrations on places that continue to require masks. In fact, right before I came on, I got an email about we just got served. One of our clients got served with a lawsuit. Pro se plaintiff, civil rights litigation. You violated my civil rights because you told me I had to wear a mask in the restaurant. He also sued Whole Foods the same day. So I'm really looking forward to that because we just got a coverage letter on it. And so here we go. But that's super annoying. And that kind of thing will continue on the fringes. But luckily, it is not commonplace. So guest expectations have to be met. And the running joke is if Chick-fil-A had managed the vaccine rollout, we would all have it, and so would our kids. But they were the leading limited service brand during the pandemic for guests feeling safe and guests trusting that the restaurant was sanitizing frequently. It seems like they really can't do anything wrong. And in terms of how they operate, profitability, now it's sanitization. And so how did they do it? They were very transparent. They listed their policies on the web. They talked about everything they were going to do. They put plexiglass shields up. They distanced their tables. Most of them closed their dining rooms altogether. And then they designated specific employees in specific parts of the drive-thru to engage people, and they had runners, and the whole operation ran seamlessly. So pre-pandemic, we had on-premise lunch at 40%. Now we have on-premise lunch of 26%, but we have off-premise takeout of 48% compared to 38% pre-pandemic. So the numbers have shifted, and luckily they're trending in the right way. We expect those to continue to trend forward. And these are just some guest relations tips from my friend Matthew Mabel from Surrender Inc. We actually have a slide where he's cited later in the PowerPoint. But if somebody comes and you are at limited capacity, you can't serve them, and they really want to be served, you just get them to come back. Give them a gift card, tell them to come back when you're not busy. Do what you've got to do, because we've got to continue to engage these people. So these were some ways that our clients engaged the guests. Some of them were online cooking classes. Some of them were to-go food kits, and some of them were social media driven pizza parties. Come pick up pizza, take it away from places that have never done take and bake pizza before. And I don't know if it's going to continue in the future, but I hope it does, because those were really special and it made life worth living during the pandemic. And I think that the operators really enjoyed it. And so as things get busier, I think they found that the level of engagement was so high and so positive with those things that they're going to continue to do that. And I hope that holds true. Restaurant real estate, man, that is a complete and total crapshoot, and we cannot really predict what's going to happen. But what we do know is that QSR is shifting in some markets to drive-through and delivery only models, or they're dedicating drive-through lanes specifically for delivery pickup. That'll be confusing. There's no way I'm going to make it into the right lane. I'll always be in the wrong lane. If there's a designated delivery lane, I'm going to accidentally get in it. So fast casual and even finer dining are more likely to start constructing restaurants that have designated pickup areas for to-go and for delivery services. Some of the quick service up models and even some of the sort of edgier fast casual models have been doing that for years with their new build outs, but a lot of traditionalists viewed it as a waste of space. I think now they realize that is not a waste of space, and it helps sort of declutter the dining room. Then all service types, we're going to see a shift to the suburbs, because the The idea that urban residents, whether business or residential, coming back anytime soon is completely up in the air. And so if this kind of pandemic were to happen again, I think we would see another exodus from downtowns. And so the current thinking is that the safer bet is going to be suburbs, but we'll see. Patios, however, are 100% going to become even more important. They're great places to serve guests, but from a real estate perspective, they're going to become mandatory because everyone views patios as safer as opposed to indoors, no matter what the health concern. So whether it's COVID or something cool we've never even heard of yet, patios are going to be very important. And unfortunately, the race for second generation space has already started. And so people that had dry powder or even dry idle money are using it to find second generation space that came available during the pandemic. Let's skip ahead past some of this. Will the labor market stabilize? Not in 2021. It's just not gonna. 2022, maybe. I love it, right? You expected an actual answer. No. So here's a headline from last week, April 24th, last week-ish. That's no surprise to anybody. Yeah, that's not a surprise. So here's the story that went with that headline. The owner of this place in Orange County said, hey, they don't even want to come back to work. Big surprise there. But the owner told them they could only come back if they were working for full-time or took their prior shifts. And so he lost 15 to 17 employees. And now when he places an ad, only 1/5 of the people that on average that responded before are responding. So people aren't showing up to interviews. They're taking other jobs. They're not taking a job. It is the employees market right now, which is a very weird place to be for the hospitality industry, this food and beverage especially. It's supposed to be America's best first job, and boy, it's just tough to fill the roster. So some employee considerations, and the most important one for my friend Matthew is leverage your culture, pay what you have to pay. But if you raise wages across the board, you're going to have a hard time dialing that back when the labor market begins to stabilize. But most importantly, keep the people you already have, staff from within, and don't put yourself in a position to where you're watching those people walk out the door and you have to replace them. It's hard enough to find bodies to fill the empty slots. So acknowledge what people need, try to give them and this doesn't apply necessarily to the restaurant business. I mean, this is just good humanity, but listen and figure out what people need. It isn't always dollars. So here are the things that are coming down the pipe. I'm talking really fast because I don't want Stephen to interrupt me because I don't know where I am on time. So we're just going to keep going. So we know that there's a very good chance that the minimum wage is going up. Also, we know that in my experience on Capitol Hill, most Congress people do not know how the tip credit works. And that is super, super scary to me. Like horrifyingly frightening that they literally think that restaurant employees that are tipped work for $2.13 an hour. It just boggles the mind. So that still remains an educational hurdle to getting smart wage legislation out of the government in some sectors, which is just crazy. But I would encourage restaurant employers, large and small, or basically all employers, to start working on a plan B or some sort of contingency plan for when this does become implemented, because it's probably not going to happen $15 all at the same time. But even if it's a gradual, I think we can all agree it's probably headed our way and we need to be ready for it. And we've been talking about it for years, but this time, and I probably said this before too, but this time it actually probably will happen. Again, with immigration reform, we've been talking about it for years. It was definitely 100% going to happen during the Bush administration, and it didn't. So I think, however, during the Biden administration, we will see immigration reform. National Restaurant Association is pro-immigration reform on most points in its platform. I can't remember exactly what it is, and I didn't include it, so I'm not going to try and quote what their position is on it, but it's to help generate access to workforce. Increased labor costs, however, could result in increased automation, kiosking, elimination of tipping, which we people have dabbled at, but I think if we end up with a $15 an hour minimum wage, we might see a shift away from that. And we may see more on a macro level, a shift from full service restaurants. So it becomes much more economical to run a counter service operation with no wait staff or some bussers if you don't have to pay $15 an hour. So I know we skipped from a few, but I feel like I'm doing pretty good on time, and I want to make sure that we have time for actual conversation. So there's nowhere to go but up after where we've been, and that's where I think we're headed. It is, as the ball says, certain.
That was great, David. Thank you. Wow. That
33 slides in 10 minutes, Stephen. That's a record, man.
Impressive, dude. And very interesting slides at that. The key word, one of the key words that's going to come out of the pandemic, in my opinion, is decimated, right? We hear that frequently, particularly with the hospitality industry. It's definitely been challenging. So I've got a question for you talking about labor, and this is not directly, well, it very well could be. You saw the vote out in California not making Uber drivers employees, right? What's your sense of that? And I'm bringing it up because your slide, I think, correctly established that as wages and employment costs get higher, there'll be a move toward automation. I saw a news report the other day that I think it's Domino's that's starting to deliver pizza with driverless cars. And so that kind of thing is coming. But anyway, I was curious to get your take on whether or not, going to the current administration, if you think there's a pretty good chance that those third-party services are going to have employees rather than contract labor. And that, of course, will increase those costs as well.
So I didn't actually see the vote. I saw DoorDash and Uber plummet in the stock market and thought, hey, what happened to this? And it was because of that announcement that suggested that those workers might be W-2 employees or might need to be treated as W employees, which is the most horrifying thing that could happen to Uber and Lyft and DoorDash. So in the short term, do I think it will happen? I think there will be a huge push for it. I think we'll see it. It'll be after comment. There'll be a lot of hearings about it. And so I think we'll actually get to see a good deal of debate about that. But what I think we're going to see is the end user is the customer. But the person, the payer that's going to get squeezed are the restaurant companies, because if they do end up becoming W-2 employees, it will become astronomically more expensive to run those delivery services, and they're not going to put that cost back on the end user, on the ordering party. They're going to put that cost onto the restaurant, and the restaurant's going to have to try to push a sliver of it through, but they can't double their prices for delivery. So the restaurants are going to get squeezed not only on their own labor when minimum wage changes, but also potentially on delivery costs, which is, even scarier for an industry that's trying to crawl its way out of a pretty deep hole.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out, and particularly for those companies you mentioned earlier, that are using the contract labor model to drive. It's going to be interesting.
I would much rather use that as a catalyst to encourage people to do their own delivery and with their own employees, even if they're using employee-owned vehicles. They just need employer and non-employee or non-owned auto insurance, and they have a much better control of the experience, of the quality of the product, et cetera. And if every mom and pop pizza store across the nation can do its own delivery, people can do delivery.
Yeah. And the other thing about that is if your product's good enough, like you mentioned earlier with the high-end steakhouse, they'll come get it.
Right.
They want it to be hot, and they want to control that process and the quality process.
The good experiences that we saw for takeaway that I personally experienced were the places that didn't just send some sullen employee in an apron out to hand me a bag through the window and walk away. They had smiles, they were engaging, they danced,
Yeah.
they hung around, and that's just good restauranting, and that's just good operations. And they weren't doing it before because they didn't need to, but they should be doing it now because they have to.
I think that's a great point. And of course, I think more people started to tip better on the takeout items, right, than we saw before. David, one thing that we've talked about previously, and I think the audience will concur, is, at the beginning of this, we had quite some deep discussions around the supply chain security of food delivery. But it does seem that, not including the trademark of the bag, as you mentioned earlier, but it does seem that most companies have established some sort of secure mechanism to provide confidence to the recipient of the food that it hasn't been tampered with between the time it left the restaurant and when it got to their hands. Does that sound right to you? Or are you still
My personal data set is 50%. I think 50% of the orders that I personally make have tamper evident or tamper proof stickers on them. The difference between tamper evident and tamper proof is tamper evident, you can see if somebody tried to mess with it. So they're a little more expensive, but they're better. And people really need to be investing in that. Yes, during COVID, they went up by 3 bajillion% because of supply and demand, just like in Texas, zip ties were at a premium because we had to zip tie our to-go booze for a while in a bag. But now that has stabilized to some degree, and it's just good business. People should have always been doing that.
Yeah, I agree. There's another thing that I wish everybody would have been doing all along. It's my personal perspective, but that's, the sustainability and the conservation and the elimination of waste. And as we're sending more packaging, for me, it's kind of the Amazon syndrome, right? Amazon's been great, but there's so much more waste often in the stream that I'm fearful that we've seen an enormous spike in that coming out of restaurants with all the to-go packaging. People aren't asking if they need, the provider is not asking if the recipient needs the plasticware. They're just putting it all in every single bag. Some of them. Right. But I wish it were more of a trend. What are you seeing there?
Well, again, like anything else, some people are doing a good job and some people aren't. But I think the operators that sort of took the risk to add a 15-cent per order premium for paper goods or whatever ended up not feeling the sting so much of that premium packaging, and were able to get more biodegradable or more environmentally friendly or more post-consumer recyclable packaging as opposed to just styrofoam packages. And if you articulate the why for the 15-cent an order paper good charge to say we're going to be more responsible with our packaging, then it isn't just you being a greedy, a greedy oligarch entrepreneur who's trying to pass through all the costs to the customer. It's to a purpose. So again, transparency and engagement is the name of the game there. And Starbucks can raise all of its prices 10 cents an item and nobody bats an eye. But if you try to tack a 15-cent per order paper goods charge, people lose their minds unless you tell them what it's for.
Sounds good, David. I got one more question I want to ask you. I want to put you in a situation of a restaurant in a lease situation in a downtown environment where, of course, office workers aren't coming back. But hold on to that for a moment and give you a second to think about it, because I want to talk about what steps we might take to get out of that lease, right? If that's the approach we want to take. But hold on. I know some people need to take off, and I want to get the CLE survey up, but I also want to remind everybody that tomorrow we're going to begin again at 10 a.m. Central. We've got 5 terrific programs. It'd be hard to beat what went on today. But real quickly, is mandatory tip sharing still legal? That's our first topic. Then the next one is the importance of active listening for lawyers. That is an on-target presentation. It's presented by Tricia Fratto of Ethics Suite, which is a very cool concept if you're not familiar with it. Foley and Lardner, Cliff's firm, will be back talking about hotel receiverships. We'll have a global and domestic threat brief with domestic violence being front and center and the steps we can take to mitigate risk and operate safely. And then, of course, as David mentioned earlier, the Ray Robinson team will be back to talk with us about curbside pickup and delivery, alcohol regulatory changes impacting hotels and restaurants. So you won't want to miss that. So David, I'm an operator. I'm a restaurant operator. I'm downtown location. People aren't coming back. My sales have dropped off. We thought when COVID ended or started to end and vaccines became prevalent, people would come back, but we all know they're not, at least not in the numbers that we anticipated. I can't continue to pay this exorbitant rent. What do I do?
That has been the bane of our existence for a year. And it all depends on the landlord. Every situation, it depends on whether your landlord is going to wants to make progress and do something or put you out of business. And so, I mean, I was in court yesterday getting a TRO against the landlord who has been fighting over a lease default that started or didn't start in June of 2020, which is the height of the pandemic. And so these fights are going to rage on for a very long time. And so being very transparent with your financials, letting the landlords know where the PPP money went, where the idle money went. If they think that you're sitting on a big fat idle loan or that you're about to take $1 million restaurant relief fund grant in a couple of weeks and not pay something to the landlord, they're going to kick you out. And so it all comes down to trying to renegotiate, trying to get a reprieve, and also figuring out how can you make any sales whatsoever to the thin, not non-existent, but thin downtown population. Yeah. So we have downtown urban clients where convention center business dried up, hotels dried up, and all the office workers were scattered to the wind. And they went from fine dining to higher end box lunches, and were able to put all of their employees back on the payroll and make money. Not as much as they were used to, but make some money that they could then translate into, we're doing the only thing possible. Landlord ended up working with them. They're going to be there for years, assuming that downtown comes back, which, I mean, it always comes back eventually, but we think that they have the staying power based on their early decisions. And if they're in a situation now, they can still adopt some of those practices. It's just, if they spent the PPP, it's really bad, Stephen, that people that spent the PPP money the way that it was supposed to be spent on employee payroll ended up getting screwed because they don't have any dry powder now. They would have probably, apples to apples, been better off if they'd allowed that money to convert to a loan and held the cash, because what we now know is cash is king the whole time.
Yeah.
And the goal was to put it into people's pockets and keep them out of unemployment. But what it did was it left the restaurants denuded of any money. At the same time, they weren't making any money. And so now their PPP 1 and 2 are over, and forgiveness is either going to happen or it's not. And your idle loan is converting to a 20-year note. And yeah, it's a great interest rate, but if you let it ride for 20 years, you're going to pay an astronomical sum of money, even at 2%. So we're nowhere near out of the woods on that, even though people are getting vaccinated, people are going back out to eat. It's going to be great. But headquarters of corporations are not sending their employees back to work in droves, especially things like banks, people that are headquartered in New York or California. They're just not. And it's really scary.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with New York City on May 19th when they open back up for business. Some of the restrictions, but it's going to be interesting to see. But I agree with you, David. And real quickly, are you still seeing, I know we've talked before, and Cliff mentioned in his presentation today that, historically, there was, when people couldn't pay, there was this immediate repossession mindset, right? And historically, when people couldn't pay, there was this immediate eviction mindset. But I think you shared with us previously that you're still seeing that mindset with the larger institutional landlords, but not necessarily with the family individual landlords. Is that still what you're seeing?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, there you go. And are you seeing some bankruptcy stave off some of this stuff, or do the personal guarantees kind of make
Yeah.
that
So
rhetorical?
interestingly, the small business bankruptcy provisions went into effect in February of 2020, which gave basically a new way for small companies to go into reorganization, and it made it much easier and less expensive. So we have seen a number of those. We had one client with a 20-unit client go in to put all of its units into bankruptcy and then come out of it.
Wow.
All last year. And so that has been a choice for not as many of our clients. I think probably some of the larger sort of mid-size operators probably were exploring those. But we have thankfully not had a lot of guarantors go into bankruptcy, because when you're wiped out, you're wiped out. The landlords aren't really going to spend that money to chase a guarantee from somebody that
Doesn't have any money.
they know lost everything.
Right. Right. Well, that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. It reminds me that we, on our phone calls, we had a program, and these are all recorded, by the way. You can find them on our blog. But we had a terrific program, I thought, around bankruptcy, and particularly around that Small Business Reorganization Act that you mentioned, which I do think has been very helpful for many small businesses. So, yeah, David, thanks. Putting together such a great program. Always interesting, always a unique perspective.
Thanks.
Greatly appreciated.
Appreciate everybody staying on.